Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Rackley, MVP at Piat Group USA, who'll be talking to you today about customizing SharePoint using the column formatter. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC21. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. Also, our call for speakers is now open. Join us for ESPC 21 online for the 1st and 2nd of June 2021. Submit today or before the 5th of February deadline, which is Friday week. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Mark Rackley. Hello, Mark.
Hello and good morning. Thanks for having me. Let me know when you guys can see my screen. Make sure you can see it okay.
Yeah, take it away, Mark.
Excellent. Thanks everybody so much for joining me. It's a lovely 8 a.m. here in the middle of Arkansas, which is smack dab in the USA. Actually, smack dab may be a colloquialism that you aren't familiar with here. I don't know. I'm sorry, it's morning. I'm still on my first cup of coffee. So again, thanks for having me. This session is about using the column formatter in SharePoint. If you do have any questions along the way, please go ahead and throw them in there into the little chat window, and I'll get to them as I can. A little bit about myself before we get started. My name is Mark Rackley. I work for a Microsoft 365 consulting firm called Piat Group. My process is very much on business process, solutions architecture, and a lot of strategy around how to use all the tools in Microsoft 365 for your organizations. My background is development, but kind of the way I live my life is, what can you do before writing a line of code? And with all the great stuff in Microsoft 365, it's just there's more and more stuff you can do before you have to write a line of code. Feel free to reach out to me. You can follow me on Twitter at @mrackley. My email address is on this slide. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. So for the goals of this session, I didn't just want to show you the column formatter and here's how you use it. I really wanted to dive in and go above the examples and the samples that you can find online and really break down that functionality for you so that you can understand how it's built, understand what the different pieces mean. And this is really going to give you the ability to go and find those samples and then tweak them to make them work exactly how you want them to work, or maybe even create your own from scratch. Again, any questions along the way? If I'm going too fast, let me know and I'll slow down. Just feel free to ask those questions. So we'll be talking about what is the column formatter. We'll go through some basic usage of the column formatter, and then we'll jump over to some more advanced stuff. And we'll talk about all the different components of that column formatter. And then at the end, we'll take a quick look at what's called the view formatter in SharePoint as well. So what is the column formatter? The column formatter is a method for you to format your modern list views in SharePoint, and these also work whenever you show those lists within Teams in a Teams tab. It doesn't change the data in the list, so when you're formatting these views and these columns, it's not actually changing the data that's saved. This is just how it is presented to the user. Anyone who can create and manage a list can use column formatting. These do not work in classic SharePoint though, but by now I hope you guys are getting off of classic SharePoint, or at least have a plan to get off of classic SharePoint. And all the formatting is controlled by a thing called a JSON object, and we'll be looking at those JSON objects a lot in this session. So here we have just kind of a basic list that you have in SharePoint with a title, effort assigned to its status. By applying the column formatter to it, you can take it from this bland, not really visually appealing list to something that's much more visually appealing, and it has much more visuals that help you identify what's going on. So those task bars really help you understand the length of those tasks that have been going on. The status lets you know visually when things are blocked. And you can even use things like icons with that have actions to them. So you can maybe click on that envelope to send the person an email. And this can be done to all of your modern SharePoint lists. So the benefits of the column formatter is that it really allows you to customize those views without having to be a developer. And I say that, and then there's the parentheses, right? This JSON object thing I keep talking about. There is quite a bit of structure to it, and there's logic to it, and it's like dev light. So if you really want to start writing these things from scratch, it really helps to have that kind of background of understanding the logic behind a JSON object. But like I said, there's a lot of samples out there, and Microsoft is giving us some interfaces to make them easier to create. So the more skills you have, the more power you get with these things. I consider these things kind of the modern replacement for the calculated fields. Also, this is a modern replacement for that data view web part that we used to use in SharePoint classic sites. Also, if you are using what's called site designs, and these are basically site scripts that are used whenever someone creates a new site, you can deploy these within your site designs. So if you have a column formatter that you like, you apply it to a task list, you can make it to where every time you deploy a new site, that column formatter gets applied to that task list automatically, so you don't have to go through and manually apply it each time. So what we're looking at here, this is that site script I was just talking about, and part of that is you are going to be adding a field custom formatter to the list you just created in this site design, and that's where you'd specify how you want that to be formatted. And again, what's great about these is whenever you create a site with a site design, it automatically creates lists, automatically applies those column formatting rules to that list. So the capabilities of the column formatter, using the column formatter, you can again do kind of custom formatting, change the way it looks. You can do conditionally, so based upon values of other fields, you can create clickable actions. You can do things like those bars we just saw, create buttons to launch flows, which is kind of cool. We're going to demo that. Formatting and custom cards, which is a newer feature of the column formatting, which is very powerful. So if you're a developer, you also have access to something called the SharePoint Framework Field Customizer. And the Field Customizer does a lot of the same things that the column formatter does. So you may be wondering when you should use the column formatter versus the Field Customizer in the SharePoint Framework. And basically, if you want to do a lot of intricate data visualizations, if you want to have a lot more control over what scripts are executed when people click on links, the field customizer has a lot more power than the column formatter. But again, you're now creating a solution for a SharePoint framework field customizer. You're writing code. You're now really deep in the development weeds. So again, I like to, if you can do something without writing code, go for the not writing code first. So to get to the column formatter, you have a couple of ways. You can get to it from within the actual list view by clicking on the drop-down arrow next to the name of the column, then go to column settings, and then specify format this column. And what it does is it opens up a column formatter over here on the left that you can then go through and format that column. You can also get to it within the list settings. So within the list settings, if you click on the field in list settings and then scroll down, you'll see a little section here for column formatting where you can go and you can put in that JSON object for column formatting there as well. So let's go through now and let's look at a lot of the benefits and things you can do with the column formatter with just using the built-in design capabilities. So here I have a task list in SharePoint. It's got a title, it's got a due date, it's got an assigned to, % complete, and a status. So if I wanted to format one of these columns, I can come in here, select that column, go to column settings, and then click on format this column. And this brings up the column formatter. And you see here that it has some built-in functionalities. So Microsoft SharePoint realizes that, oh, this is a multi-select field. Let's go ahead and give you some pre-baked options for styling. So maybe I want to just change the background color, and it will automatically go in there and apply a background color to those for you. And you can even edit those styles. And from here you can say, well, if it's not started, I want to, instead of making it blue, I want to make it gray instead. And if it's in progress, maybe now I want in progress to be blue. But you can go further and say, well, I want in progress to be blue, I want it to be bold, and I want it to be italic, and I want it to have an icon next to it, and I want to apply a border to it. So I mean, just by going through these steps, you can give a much better visual appeal to those tasks. So if you're waiting for someone else task, maybe that's one that really needs to have some kind of alert icon, let you know, hey, there's something you need to be paying attention to here. You also have the ability to do the pills. The pills are kind of neat. They give you that nice little kind of modern look to the styling, very similar to the background colors, but now you're doing it within a pill instead. Again, you can come in here and you can edit those to do more styles by making it bold. You can put a border around that, maybe throw in an icon. And this may even look similar to you if you've been using the Microsoft lists. They use a lot of this same look and feel as well. But it's very easy to change the way those things look based upon data in that list. And here you have the option to save it or cancel it if you want to. We can also choose a different field. Let's look at the due date field. So maybe you want to do some conditional formatting on the due date field. So you can see, let's go ahead and say, we're going to add a rule and say if the due date is before today, you want to set the color to red. So now all of these tasks that are due before today are red. Well, we actually don't want that to happen. We want it to be only red if it's not completed. So we can actually add a condition in here and say, and the task status is not equal to completed. And now it's only showing those tasks that are red that are due before today, and the task is not completed. We can save that. For the different fields, again, they're going to have different column settings, which is kind of nice. You saw that we have just the conditional format and the format dates. For the task status, we had the option to do additional choice pills for the % complete. We also have those data bars, so we can just apply data bars to that and it'll automatically show those as well. And we can edit those things: min value, max value, data bar color. So it's again just some really cool stuff you can do without having to actually do any effort or work to it. Any questions there before we move on?
There was just one question in, Mark. It was in relation to is the new lists approach utilizing column formatter?
Yes, it is. And you know what? I'll even show this to you now, and we'll skip that demo at the end. So yes, Microsoft Lists is actually using the column formatter, and you can actually steal from Microsoft Lists if you're like, wow, I really like the way Microsoft Lists does something. So let me just show you that. So within SharePoint, we're going to go or within Microsoft 365, we're going to go to Lists, and Microsoft Lists is just SharePoint Lists. So that everyone's clear. The only thing special about Microsoft Lists is it's a whole new interface for viewing them, creating them, but on the back end, it is just a SharePoint list. So if we go in and create a new list for Microsoft Lists, they have these templates already that you can use. You can kind of look at them, see what they look like. Let's say we like the way the issue tracker list looks, so you want to use this template for a list. So we're going to create a list called issue tracker, and we're going to create that within our site here. We'll call it issue tracker 2. Apparently I already have issue tracker. Let me create that. So now within issue tracker, let's say we really like the way that assigned to field was formatted. We can actually go into this list, go to the column settings, go to format this column, and it's showing us this JSON object I was talking about because it's not using one of those templates. But I can actually copy this and I can take it back over to our other list. I can go to our site contents, my task list. And now I can edit this field and click on the advanced mode down here, and that'll open up a blank area for you to paste in that JSON. So I can paste in what was for Microsoft Lists, and now if I preview that, it applies it, and now I get those pills with the person's picture within that as well. So if you're using Microsoft Lists and you're like, wow, I really like the way Microsoft List does that, I'm going to apply that to one of my columns, you can go through the process of yanking out that JSON object and pasting it into your list. Good question. Any others?
Yeah, a person here asked, could you use this to easily create a neat looking accordion style Q&A list?
I guess it depends. Like what maybe some more information about what they're thinking of how they would want it to look, or like what's like if I mean, if you have a Q&A list, if you have any list within SharePoint, you can apply some column formatting to it. You can apply also a view formatting to it, which we'll touch on at the very end of the session. And I might as well, I mean, gosh, we're free flowing here, aren't we? So let me just so you can know, there is a bunch of samples available online. And if you go to this GitHub repo, and take a look at all those samples out there, you can actually click on the column samples, and you can see there's just a ton to choose from. But what you can do is if you select one, there's usually a preview of what it looks like within the instructions for it. And then you can they also have the JSON that you would use to apply it to a specific column. So depending on what exactly you're wanting to do, you might want to check the samples first to say, hey, has somebody already done a sample for it that's close to what I want? And then I don't have to do as much work to make it something that I can use. So did anything else come through about that question for more detail on it, or did this?
Yeah, they just popped in. So for example, you see a list of questions, and if you click on one, it then reveals the answer below.
Actually, what you could do with that, instead of doing a click, like you could do a click or a hover. So there was, we'll do a small example for it, but there's one called custom hover cards. And what happens is you would hover over something in your list and it could actually display the content for that hover. The only thing is the answer will probably have to reside in the same list. I've not tried to access anything else. I don't think you can. But assuming you have a question and answer, you could have a list formatted for all the questions, and then on the hover, it would actually hover the answer. So yeah, actually that could be really cool. You could you could do view formatting so it displays all of your questions maybe in like tiles, and then use the column formatter so when they hover over the question, it would pop up the answer to that question.
Cool. I think they're happy. They've just said, yes, thank you, very helpful. Another question is, sorry, it might be a bit out of scope, but is it possible to prevent a field from being edited?
No.
Okay.
No, because again, you're just changing the way the fields are displayed to the user. This has nothing to do with the data that's being stored on the back end, or you know, if they have access to edit, they have access to edit.
Super.
I like the
That's all
question.
for now, Mark.
Okay. I kind of like going off topic. You just have to, like, be nice whenever the demo fails because I didn't plan for it. All right, so let's jump back over into slides, and now let's start talking about some of the advanced column formatted usage. And when I say advanced, I mean let's dive down into that JSON object thing and see how it's kind of laid out and created so that you can understand the pieces that are there. So what we're looking at here is a JSON object that is going to be formatting a field. And it looks like maybe a lot of content there. And at the end of the day, all this content does is it creates a yellow background with an exclamation icon. So let me break this down for you so you can kind of understand what this JSON object is doing. So what it's saying is that it is going to create a div on the page, when this div is where all of your content is going to live. And it's saying if the current field is less than or equal to 70, apply a class of field severity warning. And that gives it the yellow background. That field severity warning is a baked-in class that we can use to apply to our columns. And then it's saying if the current field is less than or equal to 70, I want to use the icon, create an icon that is the icon named error. And then that's what's showing that icon for us. And then it's just saying, hey, display whatever the current field is. And that's why it's displaying the 70. And this is pretty much the structure of everything that the column formatter is doing. You're going to have your elements, you're going to have your attributes, are you going to be doing, applying classes, you're going to have a button, and then you're going to have your icons and that sort of thing. So we're going to, again, go through this some more and break this down, but this is kind of an example of one that is a few things. And again, just to do the 70, yellow background and exclamation point icon. You can also use what's called Excel style expression syntax. So this does a lot of the same thing as the last one, but instead it's just using the syntax here for setting the color. So if you're more comfortable in that format, you can. It's an option. So the way this column formatter works is that it's taking whatever's in that column and it is replacing it by what is specified in that JSON object. And what it does, it replaces it with a type of HTML element. And then you're saying, what is the content for this HTML element? So this is a complete JSON object for the column formatter, but all it's saying is, I want you to use a div, so replace whatever is being displayed in that column with a div, and then put the value of that div as whatever the current field is. So theoretically, this isn't doing much at all. But just so we can see all this stuff working, let's go ahead and actually use this within our list. So if we go for our title field here, I'll just actually choose over here, choose the title field, click on advanced mode, and then I'm just going to paste that in there. And when I click on preview, you should see the text shift a little bit because we've changed the element that's been put in there. You just see it shift. And if we open up our developer tools, this is where we, maybe getting to be a little devy, I can actually move my mouse over this field and look at the HTML, and it actually says that it created a div there with the class of SP field custom formatter. So that's what got generated on the page by me creating that JSON element, JSON object. So it just created a div and it put the value of that div in there. So for fields like people fields, these are not simple text fields, so you can't just say, show me the value of the field. If I take this same JSON object and I go to the assign to field, and I go to advanced mode and then just copy and paste that in there and do a preview, it's turning to object, 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 because the actual thing being displayed, the current field, is not text. It is an object. So you have to access the property of the object that you're showing there. And the options for like a person field, you can get the ID of the person, the title of the person, the email of the person, the picture of the person, department, and job title. So you can specify, like for some reason you want to show something specific about the person field other than their name, you can use one of those properties. So if I wanted to show my email instead of my name in that field, I could just come over here, and instead of saying current field, I would say current field dot email. So current field dot email, and then when I preview that, it's now showing the email addresses for all the people instead of just the name of the person. This is also what you would do for lookup fields. So lookup fields are also objects, they're not just text. So if you need the actual text of a lookup field to show, you want to use the .lookup value property to show the text of that field. Again, I know we're kind of in the JSON object stuff here, and this is not the most exciting stuff in the world, but hopefully it's helping understand what is made up of that object. You can also display other field values within the field. So if you wanted to, for some reason, not show the title field, you wanted to show the status field. This allows you to display something other than the current field for the content of that field. So if I were to take this example here and take it over to our JSON object, instead of saying I want to show the title field, I want to maybe show me the status field, and then preview that. You can see it's now showing the status value in the assigned to field. Not that you'd ever want to do this specific example, but it does show you that you don't have to just show the name of one field. You can show the value of another field. You can even do some string concatenation to show multiple values for multiple fields if you want to. So there's just, again, a lot more stuff you can do. The one thing I want to point out is that if you want to use a field within your calculations in the column formatter, that field does need to be visible within your list view. So it's not possible to not add task status, but then do calculations and values based upon task status. That makes sense? If it didn't, let me know. So you can apply different styles to your objects using CSS styles. In this example, I'm taking whatever's in the current div. I'm using the content of the current div is whatever the value of the current field is, and we're going to set the style font weight to bold. So it should turn our text bold. So if I drop this over here, again, go to that title field, advanced mode, apply that. You can see it turns all of the fields bold. And we can apply, keep applying other things to it. So in addition to making this style bold, we're going to add a class, and this class is field severity warning. It's just going to add a little bit more to it. And we preview that. You can see now we're getting that class applied to the back of it as well. You can also add anchors so that when someone clicks on it, it will actually go somewhere. So in this example, we are going to be using an anchor element where the value of it's going to be the value of the current field. And when someone clicks on it, we're going to take them to bing.com and we're going to do a target blank. So it should open in a new tab. So if I preview that, let's go ahead and save that. So if I click on Eat Bacon, it opens up Bing for me. So now you're adding a little more functionality there to your list to go other places. But you can even take advantage of the content And this is where you might take advantage of content from another field to do additional, to do more stuff. So in this example, I'm again using an anchor element, but what I'm doing is someone clicks on that anchor, I'm using the plus operator to do some string concatenation. So I'm concatenating the URL bing.com/search with the question equals, and then I'm going to append the value of the current field to it. So this is going to create a string where it's going to pass in the value of the title field to Bing to automatically do a Bing search for whatever is in that title field. So if they come over here, and now we put this in there and save that, and someone clicks on brine pork belly, it takes us over to Bing with brine pork belly in there, and there's all the search results for brine pork belly. So this could even be used for something like, let's say you have an issues list. Well, maybe if you have a good description of the issues list, you can just, hey, click on this and just search for it. I don't know. But it does allow you to do things maybe you hadn't thought about doing with those lists and making users, giving a little more help. Any questions about that?
We have a question here. Is it possible to use column formatting on multi-line fields?
Yes, I believe so. I have a list of fields that it does not apply to. Hey, and I think that's going to be our next. What a great segue! So let's jump into the next set of slides, and we'll tell you which fields you can use the column formatter on.
And before you jump in, there's one other question. Are there any problems?
I'm kidding.
Yeah, are there any problems when pulling these types of JSON formatting columns into Power BI?
Well, again, these column formatting values are not the data stored in the back end of the list. It is just used for column formatting. So if you're accessing your SharePoint list with Power BI, it's not getting the column formatter. It's getting the actual values stored within the list. Did that answer that question?
Hopefully the person who asked it will come back and give a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Okay, if they're asking a different question I didn't answer, let me know, and I'm happy to do that.
Sure. Yes, is the response.
Okay, great. So the supported elements, so those things that we're displaying in place of what is already in the column, you can create divs, spans, you can put an image in there, buttons and paths, anchors. The supported attributes for the things you can do within an element are listed here. I'm not going to read all those to you. Here are all the supported field types. So you can apply the column formatter to any of these field types. You can see multi-line text is there. The fields that are not supported currently are managed metadata, file name fields and document libraries, retention labels, sealed columns, and multi-line text with it, rich text. So if you do have rich text on this multi-line, you will not be able to use it with the column formatter. So I guess it's a it depends answer instead of a yes answer. I showed you the classes that were being used to add that color to the back of the columns. There are a predefined set of classes you can use. Here's a list of those classes. You also get things like data bars, trending up, trending down, as well as quick actions that you can use. Whenever you open up your JSON object, there is a schema associated with that JSON object. And what this allows you to do is if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can actually get some IntelliSense whenever you're writing out, creating that object from scratch. If you're a developer, that means something to you. If you're not, you probably don't care. But for those developers out there, that will help you kind of create those objects. We talked about these things. So for the operators, you're going to see the question mark. This is our operator saying it's basically a conditional. So it's saying if something is, we're going to do an if operator. Here we're saying the operator is if it's less than or equal to. And there are a bunch of different operators that you can use for the field formatter. Here's a list of those operators. And I'm not going to read all those to you, but you can kind of get an idea for all the things. There's a lot of functionality you can do with these if you really start digging in. You have operators you can do. You can turn things to strings, to numbers. You can do some math. You can length, get date, get month. It's just a lot of power to these if you really want to dig in and make the effort to figure out what you can do with them. So in this one, we are doing multiple operators. So this is like an AND operator. So we're saying, you know, if the task due date is less than or equal to now, if that happens to be true, then we're checking to see if the current field is not equal to completed. So this is doing multiple operators nested in case you want to check more than one thing within a condition. So the button element, so this allows you to do things like, you know, have some action executed whenever someone clicks on a field, and you can do delete, you can edit properties, you can execute flows, you can do a default click and a share. And I actually like this one for flows because it can be a little bit of a pain in SharePoint for the list. If you want to go in there and say, well, I want to execute a flow, so I've got to, you know, select the item, and then I've got to go here to automate, and then I've got to find the flow, and then I've got to go through and do whatever, or maybe I need to click on the flow from, oops, maybe I need to use the ellipsis to get to the flow. It's usually like a multi-step click just to execute a flow for an item. But what we can do is we can create, we can use this with the column formatter. So I have over here in, where'd my flow go? I have a flow, and this flow, change the environment here. I have a flow. Its whole purpose is to post a message to Microsoft Teams. It's a very simple flow. And if we look at this flow, all it does is, come on, internet. Basically, for whatever selected item, we're going to get an item, and then we're going to post a message to a Teams channel. And if we look at the format of the JSON object for that, we have a JSON object for the column formatter where we are going to create a span element. We're going to give it a color, and we're going to have an icon there, and we're going to use the flow icon to give it a visual to user that, hey, this is for Power Automate. And then we're creating a button element, and the action for that element is to execute a flow. And we pass in the ID for that flow. So if we jump back over into flow, the ID is this value up in our URL. So if you go to your flow and you look at the number after /flows, this is the ID for your flow. So you can copy that, paste it into your JSON object. And then when I use this for our task list, and I preview that, you can see it's throwing the flow icon for me so the user knows that, hey, when I click on that, it's going to launch a flow. And now, if I click on smoked pork belly, it's going to launch the flow, so it's automatically open the window. I didn't have to multi-click to get there. And you can say, hey, I need help with this, Can anyone lend a hand? Now it'll run the flow. And it says it started the flow. So if I go over into Teams, and if I go to my ESPC team, I see it's old because there's a new message. And you can see there's a message here, I need help with this, can anyone lend a hand? And it has a link to the item, which will take you right there. So again, allows you to do some cool stuff with launching those flows, and this is just a simple example of that. All right. So children, when you're looking at these JSON objects, you're going to see children specified a lot. And what this is doing is it's saying, well, before we've been saying, hey, I want to put a div here, and in the div I want to show the value of the current field. Well, using children is when you're going to be showing more than one element in the column. So when you say, hey, in this current field, I want to show an icon and the value of the field, or I want to show 2 or 3 things. If you're showing multiple elements within a column, you need to use children, because each child is what are you displaying within that column. So here's an example of that. So in this example, we're going to display a span that has the icon error and a span that has the value of the current field. So just keep that in mind when you see that children in there. It's saying I'm going to be displaying multiple elements within a column. So I touched on this briefly. There is the option for hover cards. This is a fairly new addition to column formatting. And this allows you to, when someone moves their mouse over an item, you can pop up a hover card that has more information for the user. So if you want to do this, again, for your Q&A list. This is a very simple example of the hover card. Basically, it's saying that I'm going to have a div. I'm going to show the value of the status field within the div, but then I have these custom card props. And this specify what is going to be in your custom card that's going to pop up. And this one is simple. It's just going to be a div, and it is going to show on hover. It's going to show the text, define your formatter options inside the custom parts formatter property. So again, this is a very simple example. It's not anywhere near as exciting as this example here, but I wanted to, if I showed you all the HTML or the JSON object for that one, it would be way too much. So just to see this in action, let's copy this, go into our status field, format this column, click on advanced mode, preview that, and now when I move my mouse over, you can see that message pops up. So it's that simple. Again, to look at that, I was div, show the value of the status in the field, and then here's our custom card, and here's the information that's going to determine what happens for that custom card. So I already showed you this, how you can go into a Microsoft list. You can grab the value that's in the Microsoft, grab the formatting from the Microsoft list and throw it into your lists, and just, if you like what they did, steal what they did, don't reinvent the wheel. I also showed you guys the samples already for all the different things you can do with the list formatting. Again, if you like that hover card, maybe look at some of the hover card examples there to get some more complicated hover cards. Finally, there is a tool from a gentleman named Chris Kent. It's available on GitHub, and it's a nice little interface for doing column formatting to let you just get a little nice preview of it, let you go in there and gives you some intelligence behind those objects. So it's a great tool if you want to check that out. So let's briefly touch on the view formatter. So in addition to the column formatter, excuse me, there is something called the view formatter. And what this does is just like its name says, it formats, instead of formatting a column, it formats the entire view. So if we go over to our list again here, and if we go to the format column, you see we have an option here. Sorry, column settings, format column. We have an option to format the entire view. You can also get to this by clicking on the drop-down arrow under your list name, and there is going to be an option. There should be an option for format entire view. I don't know why it's not there. Maybe because it's already open. Yeah, because it was already open. Format current view. You do have some baked-in styles. You could say I want to do alternating rows, and I'll do that for you, or you can do conditional formatting. This will allow you to say, well, if the task status is equal to completed, just set the row to blue. And we can say, add a rule that if the task status is not equal to completed, and if the due date is before today, then set the row to red. So again, this gives you a little more visuals for the entire row, not just for the given column. But yeah, those are pretty neat. Again, you do have this advanced mode as well. And just like there were samples for the the column formatter, there's also a lot of samples for the view formatter. So one of my favorite samples is one that turns it into cells. So I have an example here that I actually grabbed from the column formatter samples because I didn't, not quite smart enough to write all this from scratch. But by doing this JSON object, I turn our list from a normal list into tiles. And so now you can go through and you get a hover color over it. When you click on it, it'll actually take you somewhere. So these would be good for things like using quick links. If you wanted to create some custom quick links based upon a list, you can add icons to this as well. And there you go. You can do some really cool stuff with that. But check out the view formatting samples. There's a ton to choose from there as well. We'll go over there and look at that for you. Again, by clicking on one of the samples, you can get to the, sorry, that was the wrong link. All the links are here, or all the samples are there. So within the samples, you also have view samples. And these will show you all sorts of samples for the views as well. There's an interesting view format. It looks like a message chat format. So yeah, so check out view formatting. It's very cool. All right, so that's about all I have for you guys. Any final questions? Anything I didn't get answered for you?
No, Mark, there's nothing in, but if anybody has some final questions, please do submit them now while we're sort of wrapping this up. Mark, while I have you, thanks for a great presentation. That was really, really interesting. And should anyone wish to ask a question, please do so now.
Yeah, and while they're typing, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
Great
Again,
stuff.
feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Great stuff. Mark, just one question from a person wondering, will the PowerPoint slides be available?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll make those available to you. I'll email you. I'll email them to you after we're done here, and you can share those as needed.
Brilliant. That's super. Mark, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, please bear with me here. Okay, that is the end of today's webinar. A big thank you again to Mark Rackley, and thank you for joining us today. Take care and goodbye.